Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Today on the Core Women Podcast, I'm excited to welcome Jennifer K. Hill, who is a dynamic entrepreneur, evolutionary leader, and author who built and sold her first company by the age of 38. She's the host of the popular podcast Regarding Consciousness, where she's interviewed global leaders like Deepak Chopra and Dr. Bruce Lipton. Jennifer has moderated major events with top thought leaders and co-founded OptiMatch, a platform using cutting-edge technology to build high-trust relationships in business. She's also passionate about giving back, having built 2 schools in developing countries. Join us as we explore her journey, conscious leadership, and fostering trust in business through innovation. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's such a pleasure to be with you and your audience, Summer.
Absolutely. Before we dive into your professional journey, if you could describe the evolution of your journey in one word to this point, what would that word be?
Connection.
Tell us more.
I like to think of it as what I call the golden triangle of connection, and that really sums up my whole entire life. Connection to self, connection to others, and connection to purpose. And I spent the first 30 years of my life cultivating and better understanding myself so eventually I could better understand others. I often share with people, Summer, talk I do called Cracking the Code of Human Connection. I will share that for me, it was like, you got a book on how to be a human being and you got a book on how to be a human being. But when I was a little girl, I opened mine and it was blank inside. And so I've been writing the story of connection to myself, others, and humanity and greater purpose my whole life. And I feel like it's really all been culminating in the last 5 to 6 years.
So what was the transition in those last 5 to 6 years? Tell us more about that.
I call it the trifecta. So the year I sold my company, it was the 1, 2, 3 punch. Sold the company, great, huge success, awesome. Got a divorce from my husband and got diagnosed from being on the spectrum all in the same 6 months. So that was quite the experience. And when you go through something like that, as an entrepreneur, we often identify as our organization. I remember trying to negotiate a package when I was leaving the company to no longer run it and hand it off to our team. I said, you guys need to pay me more up front. You're going to need me. Everybody's going to be calling me. It was both the greatest compliment and the greatest gut punch I ever got. They never needed me. They were like, all I had to do was consult 10 hours a week after I left the company. And they never even needed me because they were so successful without me. So that's essentially what you want to do when you're a leader is have a company. It's still successful 6 years post-acquisition. And at the same time, you're like, well, then who am I? What am I? Oh, wait, I'm also on the spectrum, high-functioning autism. Thanks for that little gift. What does that mean? And I'm no longer in the relationship I was in for 14 years. So it was really a true death and rebirth of who I knew myself to be as a human. And then the great part that emerged out of all that is creation of self, creation of who I want to be, who I get to be in the world, creation of my soulmate, of who my dream partner is and that I found. So all of that, it begins with a complete breakdown of who we think we know ourselves to be, and then a rebuilding and rebirthing of who we get to choose to be as human beings.
Yeah, I love that. Who we choose to be. What it sounds like to me is along your journey in those last 6 years, there were a lot of like aha moments. And then it was, where do I go from here? How does that develop? But you know that from the point of opening that first book with those empty pages to where you are today, you've been developing all along. It's just been in this last 6 years, you've been able to redirect it and cultivate that in the way that you choose to.
Yeah, I'll use a friend of mine's analogy of the imaginal cells. Are you familiar about butterflies and how they emerge from being a caterpillar?
Yeah, metamorphosis.
Yeah, they literally liquefy. It's like, whoosh, everything you were before, everything, all that caterpillarness gets turned into caterpillar soup or what's called imaginal cells. And then they get reimagined into this new form, which is a butterfly, and then you emerge anew. And I think it's not just true for me. From a lot of the people I've talked to, I feel like there's been this mass metamorphosis in the consciousness of humanity that we're seeing played out on the global scale as well as the individual scale. And I think that the more we can surrender, the more we can get curious about this process rather than judging it or ourselves or others who are choosing to go on the journey with us or not. That's freedom. When I was meditating at the beginning of this year and I said, what is my purpose? What am I meant to do this year? And I was told to teach as many human beings as possible tools for resilience and self-regulation, and that's what's going to serve humanity and all of us. And so that's my life, as I focus every day on OptiMatch and our technology that matches people. And in turn, I feel deeply that we cannot connect meaningfully with others until we have that meaningful connection to self. So it's this two-pronged system that then allows for our purpose to unfold and emerge.
I fully agree with you in relation to where it begins with self before we can go out and help others. Being in alignment, having that energy and awareness of your energy and how it's impacting yourself and the world, and having that higher awareness. So you've done so much. You started a company. You sold a company at 38. You've learned some of your biggest lessons in the last 6 years. What are some of the biggest lessons you learned along your journey and how to connect and build community around you?
One of the things that I had an epiphany in a meditative state I was in is that everyone is doing the best that they can in every moment, and that includes you. And I'm going to be really frank with you. When I'm in a healthy, balanced state, that's my mantra. I'm like, everyone's doing the best they can. And then the best part about this is, of course, you share anything you learn with your friends, with your loved ones. I shared it with my husband. And yesterday I was having a particularly challenging opportunity for growth. I like to call them opportunities for growth rather than challenges. I'm very specific in my wording of things. And so my husband literally turns it back around on me last night before bed. He's like, honey, do you think they're doing the best that they can? No. No, they most certainly are not. So it's funny because it depends on, it's a spectrum, right? It depends on where we're at. It's been both my greatest lesson, and sometimes we still all get triggered. And that's why one of my go-to techniques is heart math. That was really life-changing for me. Is around the same time I started doing shows with Deepak Chopra, I was invited to host a TV series with heart math about first responders during COVID. And I was often recording these shows at 2, 3 a.m. my time in London. And we'd be doing shows with doctors, nurses, people who were on the front lines during COVID about how they were regulating their nervous system. And so 9 times out of 10 nowadays, I can utilize heart-focused breathing, put myself back into a physiological state of coherence, which is not some woo-woo thing, it's actually scientifically measurable. And in doing so, that then allows me to show up as my best self. Now, sometimes we're not our highest and best self, but often one of my favorite things that Heart Math taught is a study they did. It's basically very simple. You breathe in and out through the center of your heart, slowing down your breathing, and that creates what's biologically called a state of coherence that you can measure with your heart rate variability. And HeartMath did a study on this where they took 40 people, 10 groups of 4, and in each of the groups, 3 people were taught coherence techniques, and the 4th person was not. And in every one of those cases, this has been replicated many times, the 4th person got into a state of coherence. And I actually have a very cool story about this I've never shared before because it just happened. I've been traveling nonstop for 3 weeks, and I use all of these tools, talk about it, planes, trains, you name it, to regulate my nervous system. And the other day I was in Miami, and often on a Saturday, one of my favorite things to do is to turn my phone off and spend a few hours just in silence and reflection, heart-focused breathing, in a state of coherence, maybe read a book. So I'm at this lovely sushi hotel in Miami, and as I walk in to this shop, you see a pretty dress in the window. I'm in the hotel, I walk in, and I notice these 2 girls, and I walk to the back, and I'm going to try to find this dress and I don't see it. So I go to where the ladies are working at retail and they're hugging and laughing. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, forgive me, pardon me. And they look up at me and they said, do you have some sort of special energy? I said, I don't think so. They said, the strangest thing just happened. May we share it with you? I said, please. They said, right before you came in, we were so angry with each other. We hadn't been speaking for days. We're the best of friends, and we were so angry. But the moment you walked in, we felt like hugging each other and we made up. And I love that because that's the power of coherence is that, yes, things may be going sideways in the world with our friends, our loved ones, our business associates in the world, whatever it is. Yet if we can physiologically put ourselves in a state of coherence, what we feed the field matters, and that actually impacts people around us who we might not even know.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I was just talking to an author previous to this conversation, and she was saying it's the radiance that we put out, it's our energy frequencies, it's a lot of things that when we are in connection with ourselves, community, the earth, those vibrations change.
Mm.
Our alignment changes. So about how we feel about ourselves and about the world. And so when that changes, I think you are attracting certain energy as well. I love what you said about the regulation, the heart, the center, the energy regulation. Working in the medical field, I think also working in trauma and assessing people who are suicidal, homicidal, gravely disabled. It is not just needed during a time of stress or COVID. It is needed every day in that field. It is needed in a lot of different fields where we need to feel grounded and want to feel more grounded and bring ourselves back to center because there is a lot going on in high stress and trauma type of jobs. It's like, how do you self-regulate again when it's like, your levels of serotonin, your levels of dopamine are going up and down. And then you're dealing with trauma all day long. So how do you re-regulate throughout your day? And by the end of the day, where you're saying, oh, okay, whew, I can go back to breathing. I feel my heart. It's in regulation. I'm centered. I'm refocused. And I think that what you're talking about are tools to help with that.
Absolutely. It's all about once we get that under control, once we quiet that amygdala and
Yes.
re-access our brain function, then we can begin to think about human connection. Like I remember I was feeling pretty frustrated about something with my co-founder at one point this year of our tech company, OptiMatch.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment something triggers me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is where self-awareness comes in when we can feel, when we can feel our spine bristling and starting to go like, I'm going to get defensive. This is going to turn into
Yeah.
something, not necessarily for the highest and best good of anybody. Can you, number one, in that moment, shift into any sort of self-regulation technique? I'm a fan of so many of them. HeartMath's just one of them. Once we do that, then we can consider who we're speaking to, and then we can respond rather than react. And when I realized that when I was in the middle of an upset with my co-founder, Julian, he's what we call our assessment lamp. It's ohm.app/survey. If anybody wants to try it, you get a free report of how you're motivated. And so when Julian and I get in differences of opinion, it's often because I'm what's called a high lychee, the L in lamp, and he's what's called a high apple, which is motivated by facts. Lychees like to move quickly and get things done. We want it done yesterday. Apples like to be slow and methodical. I'm more like the rabbit, he's more like the turtle. And understand that, and we can move away from judging each other as though we're misbehaving and instead drop into awareness and use our tools for self-regulation. That's where deep connection to ourselves and others emerges.
Well, this is so interesting. And you did divert the conversation more into the OptiMatch focus. So let's go there. Let's go to OptiMatch because it sounds very fascinating. And I love how you mentioned this acronym and how you're talking about fruit. So
Well, that's why we chose fruit because it's so heavy, right? Like
right,
you have all these profiling tools out there. I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert, I'm a
right.
this. I'm like, you're a fruit, deal with it. You're a mango. Who cares? Mango's not better than apple or worse than pear. Suck it up, people. It's not like personal. Because the
Right.
more we take things personally, the more than that can be triggering. And we're like, okay, what's the most neutral thing we could come up with? Fruit.
I loved it. I'm like, lychee, apple. Okay, let's go. So,
I'm glad we got you laughing. And I love lamp. If you've ever seen Anchorman, I loved that our co-founder, our COO, David came up with this. And he's like, it's a lamp assessment. I was like, I love lamp.
Oh my gosh, I so love Anchorman and I know exactly what you're talking about. I love lamp.
Yeah, so that's it. That's my new mantra. I think we're gonna have to get shirts made that say I love lamp.
Oh my gosh, you have me cracking up here. So, how does OptiMatch leverage technology to foster high trust relationships in business? And what inspired you to co-found this venture?
Yeah, it's a two-sided question. So, what inspired us is Julian gets all the credit, my co-founder, and Moon, who's originally one of the co-founders with us, is Moon was building a company to match people with the right therapists and coaches, and she was looking for an advisor. And I swore, never will I ever build another company again. For anybody out there who's ever built and sold a company or built and shut down a company, you know it's like giving birth to a baby. You're putting your heart, sweat, blood, and tears. So after I left the company, I was like, never will I ever, dot, dot, dot. And then a few months later, Moon's like, well, really, I'm looking for an advisor for this company for matching therapists and coaches. And I was like, okay, I meditate on it. Sure. Okay, I can be an advisor. And then about a month or two in, she's like, well, I really want a co-founder. I was like, no, no, okay. I meditated on it. I heard yes. But I said I would only come on board if Julian, who helped me sell the last company, was brought in as a team
Mm.
member. And Julian was instrumental. So Jules was one of the ones who said, Jen, listen, we talked about many things because everybody's been trying to match. Dating companies are trying to match. Businesses are trying to match. And for me, having struggled with, depression, anxiety, all of that myself, mental health had always been very near and dear to my heart. And so Jules said to me one day, he's like, Jen, why don't we just create a mathematical formula that mirrors your ability to intuitively connect people? Because that's what I did
Mm.
for 20 years in recruiting. And Moon and I both were like, shoot, Jules, can we do that? And he's like, yeah, he's like a tech genius.
Mhm.
And so next thing you know, Moon and Julian and I spent 8 months developing this questionnaire that's backed by a very complex mathematical formula that answers how are you motivated? And one of the other reasons we actually called it the fruits is I've been talking at HR conferences and those sorts of things for decades. And one of my favorite analogies is it's literally sometimes like one person speaking apple and another speaking orange. And we can both be speaking English, Summer,
Yeah.
but that's the point. If we can't hear each other because we're speaking in a different motivational language, then it's going to lead to what I call accidental adversarial relationships. And so our dream is to help 1 billion people connect deeply to themselves and others.
Mhm.
And I truly feel Summer is back to the why. As somebody who tried to take my own life a couple of times when I was younger, struggled with bulimia for a decade, really did not think I would live to see my 30th birthday, let alone my 18th birthday or my 43rd, which is how old I am now. I want to do whatever I can to help humanity, to help anybody else out there who's struggling with understanding themselves or others, who maybe somebody out there, one of you right now is listening, going, I didn't get the book on how to be human either. I use all of these tools in my tool belt to help me understand myself and others. When I was younger, Summer, I used to say inappropriate things all the time. I couldn't read people. I didn't understand what was appropriate or not appropriate to say. And so I find by having these tools, it's like a little cheat sheet. It's like that little book on how to be a human. Oh, well, here's what you need to know. If you're a high apple, sometimes very high apples can be a no first before they're a yes. But imagine if you're dating somebody or trying to become friends or work with somebody and they tell you no first. If you don't have that awareness that that might be how they're motivated, then you might treat them as, oh, well, they're being a jerk or nobody likes me.
Yeah.
No, it's not personal. They just might be motivated differently than you. And that's one of our goals is to cultivate understanding. I use this technology with my own coaching clients and we love it. We get to help the world with this.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating. And I love that it's breaking down or addressing assumptions, addressing things that maybe you've had this assumption just right off the bat. We all have assumptions. That is part of our makeup as humans, but those aren't always correct assumptions. They can be faulty assumptions. And so your approach and the tools that you offer are so helpful, will be so helpful to so many because just like books, we've got these self-development books and there's so many different tools out there and we can use these tools or we can, take these tools, but how we put these tools into practice looks very different for each one of us. And that's what's so lovely about your program, different programs out there that help folks. They are tools to be able to bring awareness and then for folks to be able to apply those tools to support their wellness, essentially, to respond versus react, to be able to bring that intensity and that regulation back into balance. Like you were talking about, the amygdala. That is our fight and fight response brain mechanism. That mechanism, we need it. Yes, we need it. We need it to be hyper-aware sometimes. For instance, when I was working in mental health lock facilities and somebody was coming at me because they were in a state of psychosis and thought maybe I was a bear, I was whatever, I had to have my amygdala locked into gear so that I could run backwards and lock myself in a room because I was going to be attacked. But how do you, as a professional in that situation, bring yourself back to balance? Bring that to some point of, I can regulate and I don't always have to be in a mode of reaction.
100%. You just nailed it, Summer. That's it. I wish I could be like Oprah and be like, you look under your seat, you get self-regulation and connection, and you look under your seat. Like, I literally wish I could gift every human being in the world because it can save lives. I mean, it literally just metaphorically.
It absolutely does. And not just metaphorically, I think physically, mentally, spiritually. And when you have that back into balance, you don't end up on the floor going, I am struggling. You know, we all have hard days. Yes, but it's not like, oh my gosh, I can't get back up, because now you have these tools that you've offered somebody to say, okay, I can be here in my regulation, or I can be here and I want to function here instead every day, the best that I can.
Choice. It goes back to how we started the conversation. Choosing, that's the freedom to choose rather than having life do the choosing for you. As somebody who's been at the effect of life rather than the co-creator of it, when you're at the effect of life, life is happening to you, not for you. And yet life is always happening for us. And our ability to choose is our ability to regulate our nervous system and to not allow ourselves to spiral out of control when we get triggered or frustrated or upset. And I will be remiss if I don't mention this, Summer, we're not perfect. I still get angry. I was like angry painting at 3 a.m. today because I couldn't go to sleep and something had triggered me. But you know, instead of being upset for days, weeks, months, or years, what if we could be upset for a few hours or a few minutes? Like, what freedom would that give you in your romantic relationships, in your friendships, in your business relationships? How much more liberated would you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I love so much about this. And you also have your podcast regarding consciousness. You have OptiMatch. These are such great offerings to the world. Thank you so much for joining me here. As we come to the close of the interview, my last question is, if you were to give the listeners one tip about how they can really tap into their own consciousness, what would that tip be?
Spend time in silence with your phone off. It was a tip that was given to me 4 years ago during COVID. And even if you just spend a minute at the top of every hour, you turn off your devices, you turn off your phone, turn off the television, iPads, whatever have you, give yourself 30 to 60 seconds a couple of times a day, and maybe eventually it'll grow into 20 minutes or 30 minutes or a few hours. It's in the silence that we hear our higher selves, that we hear a purpose, that we're able to connect more deeply to ourselves and others. And so I invite you, whatever it takes, allow yourself those 60 seconds a couple of times a day, and maybe even proactively use it to write down something you appreciate, or maybe just sit in reflection quietly and just give yourself space, because it's from space that we have the ability and permission to create who we want to be in the world.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
My pleasure, Summer. Thank you and your listeners for listening.
Absolutely. You can follow Jennifer Hill on LinkedIn, on Instagram at Jen Hill Speaker, on Facebook at Jennifer K. Hill, and at her YouTube page at Jennifer K. Hill and at om.app.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women, and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a core women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.